You see the boarded up shops everywhere they go to the cities that they went to a few years ago that were prosperous. There's half the traffic on the road, but unemployment is really going through the roof, way beyond what they're telling it in the public, of course. And of course, that is the agenda for the Western world, as Britain well knows now. They have suffered it for years. America is now going through the transition phase as they're brought down to pretty well near a third world status. That will come. And out of it will come the new world order, where the United Nations will allocate food to every region, as I like to call it. That's in their charter, by the way. And you'll have to keep your population down. And they'll still leave it to you as a nation. That's the only time they'll mention your nation state. Is when they tell you, well, we can't give you more rations this year. We're going to share it with so-and-so and so-and-so, but you have to find ways of depopulation. And of course, once they've got that going, they'll just reduce your quota every year. That's how the world's to be run. Depopulation has always been a big problem for the elite all down through the ages. When the people start to populate, they're well fed at times. They get wars going. Sometimes famine wipes them out, of course, through plague. And war itself has been a great thing for causing famine. When the guys are all fighting, no one's farming at all. So this has all been used as far back as the days of Greece. And, we always think again, because we're so stupid, we're trained to be stupid and not think. And again, it's because we're so naive and we're so generally nice as people. We can't imagine our leaders doing anything nasty to us. It is unimaginable because you're fed so much propaganda that, for instance, the military would never do anything nasty to you. It's your military and you're proud of those guys in the uniform for some reason, and it's been brainwashed into you. Here's an article here. It goes back to Sunday the 21st of April 2002, and it's from The Observer. Millions were in germ war tests. I've read this before, but it's time to read it again because it ties in with the spraying article I'll read later. It says, the Ministry of Defence turned large parts of the country, that's Britain, into a giant laboratory to conduct a series of secret germ warfare tests on the public. A government report just released provides for the first time a comprehensive official history of Britain's biological weapons trials between 1940 and 1979. See, that's the cut-off date. The stuff that's happened since, that will get released in 2050 or something. Many of these tests involved releasing potentially dangerous chemicals and microorganisms over vast swaths of population without the public being told. While details of some secret trials have emerged in recent years, the 60-page report reveals new information about more than 100 covert experiments. The report reveals that military personnel were briefed to tell any inquisitive inquirer the trials were part of research projects into weather and air pollution. Isn't that kind of familiar, folks, eh? The tests carried out by government scientists at Porton Down were designed to help the Ministry of Defence assess, this is what they told the public eventually, Britain's vulnerability. If the Russians were to have released clouds of deadly germs over the country, what tripe, eh? What utter rubbish. Yeah, let's see if it'll kill off our own folk, because the Russians might do it. No, they were testing stuff that would be going to use down the road on the whole planet, folks. It says in most cases the trials did not use biological weapons, but alternatives, well, they were biological actually, which scientists believe would mimic germ warfare, and which the Ministry of Defence claimed were harmless. But families in certain areas of the country who have children with birth defects are demanding a public inquiry. One chapter of the report says the fluorescent particle trials, listen to this, reveals how between 1955 and 1963, aircraft flew from northeast England to the tip of Cornwall along the south and west coast, dropping huge amounts of zinc cadmium sulfide. Cadmium's kind of familiar with the spraying today, isn't it? On the population. The chemical drifted miles inland as fluorescence, allowing the spread to be monitored. In another trial using zinc cadmium sulfide, a generator was towed along a road near Frome in Somerset where it spewed the chemicals for over an hour. Of course, the wind carried it across an area, and then they'd see who got sick. In another chapter, large area coverage trials, the Ministry of Defence describes how between 1961 and 1968, more than 1 million people along the south coast of England from Turkey to the New Forest were exposed to bacteria, including E. coli and Bacillus globigi, which mimics anthrax. So these were actually live bacterium under the guise of, well, it's going to mimic anthrax, yeah. These releases came from a military ship, the Ice Whale, anchored off the Dorset coast, which sprayed the microorganisms in a 5 to 10 mile radius. The report also reveals details of the DICE trials in South Dorset between 1971 and 1975. These involved US and UK military scientists spraying into the air massive quantities of Serratia marcescens bacteria with an anthrax stimulant and phenol. I like that anthrax stimulant, eh? I mean, a more, a less dangerous type of bacteria, eh? Similar bacteria were released in the sabotage trials between 52 and 64. These were tests to determine the vulnerability of large government buildings and public transport to attack. In 1956, bacteria were released on the London Underground at lunchtime, along the northern line between Collier's Wood and Tooting Broadway. The results show that the organism dispersed about 10 miles. Similar tests were conducted in tunnels running under the government buildings in Whitehall. Experiments conducted between 1964 and 1973 involved attaching germs to the threads of spiders' webs in boxes to test how the germs would survive in different environments. These tests were carried out in a dozen locations across the country, including London's West End. Of course, Southampton and Swindon. The report also gives details of more than a dozen smaller field trials between 1968 and 1977. In recent years, the Ministry of Defence has commissioned 2 scientists to review the safety of these tests. Both reported that there was no risk to public health, although one suggested the elderly or people suffering from breathing illnesses may have been seriously harmed. That's like death, if they inhaled sufficient quantities of microorganisms. This is, however, some families in the areas which bore the brunt of the secret tests are convinced the experiments have led to their children suffering birth defects, physical handicaps, and learning difficulties. The test they did with the US government in Canada over Winnipeg in about 53, I think it was, or 54, had the same thing. A lot of the people, the parents, ended up with cancers, big time, and some now, the children and offspring also ended up with cancers and defects as well. That's your governments at work. And they did the same thing, of course, in the US. Quite something. And it's still ongoing, of course, because at the very end of the article, they ask if there's anything being carried out. So a spokesperson, that's a public relations officer, was asked whether such trials are still being carried out, and she said, it's not our policy to discuss ongoing research. There you go. Well, you're just imagining you're seeing all these spraying in the sky and stuff. It's your imagination. And NASA even put a video to be shown in all schools to show them what condensation trails are, to get them used to seeing these long trails in the sky that are definitely not condensation trails, but they'll never know that. They'll believe what they're told. They're going to grow up for this because it's going to go on for years. This plan's going to go on for years. Here's Ireland and this sovereign independence. It says from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Wednesday, the 29th of September, 65-year-old Breda Murphy will be chained to the gates of the Dublin Parliament. Her protest has been provoked by the ongoing aerial spraying being conducted over much of Ireland, just like we are here too in Canada and the States. Several governments across the planet have been spraying their civilian population with different, often harmful biological and chemical agents since the 1940s. The British government has even admitted to some of these so-called tests. One of the most common techniques in use today is that of civilian airlines being employed to carry out the spraying. Such airliners can be identified by what appears at first glance to be additional exhaust trails. Most of them actually are not, as far as I'm concerned, traditional airliners, because I've seen them do loops and do X's and turn out the stuff on and off and change course. And these ones are white, they're unmarked, the ones that you see. It says, however, the abnormal addition trails emanate from locations on the other plane other than the engines. It's true that there's other things, it's not coming from the engines. The abnormal trails also take much longer to dissipate than regular condensation trails. Concerned observers have dubbed these abnormal trails chemtrails. Where intensive spraying is being carried out over the cities, for instance, the lingering chemtrails often result in crisscross patterns in the sky. So Breda Murphy, who lives in the town of Kildare for much of her life, on the 14th of June this year, after an intense program of aerial spraying over Kildare began, she noticed almost immediately the effects of it. She even witnessed large black helicopters, low down of course, I've seen that here too once, spraying the town. Within days of the commencement of the spraying, she and many of her neighbours started to experience severe adverse health effects. These include nosebleeds, that's common, migraines, very common, and serious respiratory complaints. You can't clear them up because it attacks the bronchial tubes, it breaks down the mucous membrane, bacteria set in, and you've got this ongoing bronchitis. Breda herself endured headaches, breathlessness, and that's another one too, is breathlessness, severe aches and pains, and an elevated temperature. One side of her face swelled up, and her eyes became so badly swollen she had trouble seeing out of them, because you get that when you get sinus problems. It says she was forced to consult an emergency doctor and was diagnosed with elevated blood pressure and infections of the sinuses and upper respiratory tract. She spent a miserable summer cooped up in her house, leaving it only when absolutely necessary. In the last few weeks, the spraying over Kildare has recommenced. Breda and her neighbours are once again living in fear for their health. Breda demands that the government immediately puts a stop to the spraying of Kildare and the other targeted areas of the country, as to do otherwise constitutes a serious breach of hers and all others affected Irishmen and women's basic human rights. This is a death spray. You know how many folk are dying from this? Do you know? It's definitely those who are elderly or young, who are more sensitive to others. They'd be fine without the spraying, no symptoms at all. They get all the problems of asthma and so on. They'd be fine, but no, they're getting such chronic infections that it's closing up their tracheas and the whole thing, and they die. And just like the article I read, I mentioned, or the doctor I mentioned before, the surgeon who harvests hearts, and the massive suicide rate, that won't be in the paper either, because this is a top agenda. A top agenda. The government will not mention it, and it's a world agenda. And there is cadmium in this stuff too, which is a cancer-causing agent. Anyway, a lot of folk can't see it because they've never looked up at the sky in their lives, and they don't know what to compare it with. What a shame, eh? What a shame. To pretty well near a third world status, that will come. And out of it will come the new world order, where the United Nations will allocate food to every region, as I like to call it. That's in their charter, by the way. And you'll have to keep your population down. And they'll still leave it to you as a nation. That's the only time they'll mention your nation state, is when they tell you, well, we can't give you more rations as people. We can't imagine our leaders doing anything nasty to us. It is unimaginable, because you're fed so much propaganda that, for instance, the military would never do anything nasty to you. It's your military, and you're proud of those guys in the uniform for some reason, and it's been brainwashed into you. Here's an article here. It goes back to Sunday, the 21st of April, 2002. You see the boarded up shops everywhere they go to the cities that they went to a few years ago that were prosperous. There's half the traffic on the road, but unemployment is really going through the roof, way beyond what they're telling it in the public, of course. And of course, that is the agenda for the Western world, as Britain well knows now. They have suffered it for years. America is now going through the transition phase as they're brought down, wipes them out, of course, through plague. And war itself has been a great thing for causing famine. When the guys are all fighting, no one's farming at all. So this has all been used as far back as the days of Greece. And, you know, we always think, again, because we're so stupid, we're trained to be stupid and not think. And again, it's because we're so naive and we're so generally nice here. We're to share it with so-and-so and so-and-so, but you have to find ways of depopulation. And of course, once they've got that going, they'll just reduce your quota every year. That's how the world's to be run. Depopulation has always been a big problem for the elite all down through the ages. When the people start to populate, they're well fed at times, they get wars going, sometimes famine.